The process of natural selection works by increasing the specific adaptations that individuals have within their population that allows them to survive better and pass on their traits compared to others. So some individuals are going to have variations of particular traits that allow them to be more successful. It allows them to live longer potentially, and if not longer, at least be able to produce more offspring compared to others. So basically it enhances their survival and ability to reproduce. So you can think of adaptation in a couple of different ways. First, we're going to talk about it as the specific traits that increase the chance of survival of an individual. So adaptation can also be a process, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. The way that we measure the effectiveness of an adaptation is by something called fitness. Now, fitness is not what you think of when you think of working out, bodybuilding, running marathons, things like that. Fitness, as it is related to evolution and adaptation, is the measure of the relative reproductive output of a particular individual. So this means individuals with certain adaptations are going to leave more offspring than their counterparts without that adaptation. Now, this is all relative, so it's not total number of offspring you leave during your lifetime. It's total number compared to other individuals. So if you have a particular adaptation that allows you to leave 10 offspring throughout your lifetime, whereas say all of your brothers and sisters have an allele that only allows them to leave 6 or 7, you have higher fitness than them. Now, sometimes this is thought of as an absolute value, but generally we're talking about relative fitness. And it doesn't have to be much higher fitness. You might leave 1 more offspring over your lifetime, and all of your offspring might leave 1 more compared to everyone else. Any adaptation that increases your fitness at all is considered an advantageous adaptation. So a few things that are important regarding an organism's overall biological fitness. As I said a minute ago, an individual's fitness is measured relative to other genotypes or phenotypes in the population. And if you have a particular genotype or phenotype that allows you to leave more offspring compared to everyone else in the population, or at least compared to other individuals that don't have that trait and the respective alleles that control it are going to increase in frequency. Because you have a higher fitness, you leave more offspring. Those offspring with the same trait leave more offspring as well. So you can see that that trait will increase in frequency while any other alleles will decrease in frequency. So fitness can change over an individual's lifetime. So fitness is very tightly related to the specific environment in which an organism lives. And in a different environment, an individual's fitness might be slightly reduced compared to others. So fitness is not a static event. Your fitness can change over your lifetime. It can change over short periods of time throughout the year or throughout a couple of years. And it really depends on the environmental impact on the trait that you have at the moment. So for example, on the right-hand side, we have this little ground mouse, and they generally come in 2 colors, a dark one or a light one, at least in this study. They looked at the effects of individual survival rates on light or dark habitats. Now, our book doesn't go into too much detail on this study. This study is quite a famous study that was done along the coast in Florida, where you have light-colored sand and you also have dark areas farther inland that are darker soil, a lot of shadowed areas from the brush and the trees that are back away from the coast. And so they found that mice that were similarly matched to their environment had a better survival rate in with respect to predation. So the light-colored mice that lived on the light-colored sand were less likely to be preyed upon by hawks and other things in their habitat, and therefore they had increased fitness. They were able to pass on that light-colored allele more frequently than dark individuals on the light sand. The opposite was seen when looking at dark mice on dark sand. The light individuals were preyed upon more frequently. So those individuals with the dark allele in their population were able to survive and pass on their allele more frequently. So you can see, depending on which specific environment they lived in, they had a better chance of survival. They had higher fitness, a better chance of leaving their alleles in the next generation. All right, so our next element that relates to an organism's fitness is often called survival of the fittest. So this is very much related to our first element, the one that said individuals' fitness is measured relative to other genotypes and phenotypes. So if an individual has higher fitness, they're going to leave more offspring compared to others in the population. So they're going to have greater reproductive success. Now, this is directly related to genotype and phenotype frequency, which we talked about in the first element. And that is, if you have more offspring with your similar traits, they are also going to pass on those traits. And so the specific genotypes and phenotypes that are related to those traits are going to increase. Now, what this means is that those individuals who are best fit to their environment, have the greatest fitness in their environment, are going to just survive the best. Now, this is sometimes a little bit misleading because people often interpret this phrase survival of the fittest out of context with what fitness means in biology. So just as the word fitness in biology doesn't mean the strongest or the fastest, survival of the fittest also doesn't mean survival of the strongest or the fastest. It means survival of those individuals with the specific traits that allow them to fit into their environment most closely. So survival of the fittest means that those individuals with the best traits have the greatest reproductive success, not the ones who are biggest, strongest, and fastest. Now, that's not to say that being bigger or stronger is not advantageous, but it really depends on the environment and it depends on the trait that we're specifically looking at. So let's talk a little bit more about adaptation. So adaptation is the process by which those organisms that are more fit increase their traits in a population. So we said that adaptation could be a specific trait that gives you a better chance of survival and reproduction, but it's also a process. And it's basically the process of natural selection increases the frequency of beneficial adaptations in a particular environment. And then those specific features make the organism more fit. And you can see this is kind of a cycle. If those features make you more fit, you're more likely to pass them on, and that adaptation is going to increase in the population. So another thing to remember here, just as evolution as a general process does not cause advantageous traits to appear, adaptation also does not cause advantageous traits to appear. The process of adaptation works on traits that are already present in the population. So again, there has to be variation. There has to be different alleles producing different phenotypes for the same trait, and some of those traits are going to be adaptations that fit the environment a little bit better. Now, I think that confusion comes up because people like to say, oh, you can just adapt. Well, keep in mind that the population is what changes in evolution. Organisms are born with or without the adaptation that makes them more fit. They don't acquire it over their lifetime. Organisms are born with a particular genotype that gives them a particular phenotype. Evolution, adaptation, natural selection, none of that can change that individual. The only thing that evolution, adaptation, natural selection can do is basically take that individual out of the population or allow it to stay in the population long enough to reproduce. So an individual is born with a particular adaptation and it's not. If it has it, it will survive and pass it on to the next generation. If it doesn't have it, it's going to either pass their adaptation, their specific adaptation, whatever it is, on at a lower frequency, or maybe it won't pass it on at all. Maybe it will die before it even reaches reproductive age. So just keep in mind, that's a problem that students tend to have, is that they think that adaptation can cause traits to appear, and that's not the case. But the process of adaptation does make a population better suited to their environment because of the relative reproductive success of individuals with certain adaptations. So sometimes people think that adaptations, natural selection, will eventually lead to perfect organisms. And sometimes students ask, well, why aren't there perfect organisms? And the reason is related to this idea that evolution sort of is governed by the rules of chance. Remember, mutations are chance, genetic drift is chance, which individuals move in and out of a population is chance. And then, of course, we've got the environmental effects. Now, the environment is constantly changing, and I'm not talking about big changes like global warming. I'm talking about small year-to-year fluctuations in the environment. Just think about Illinois. Some winters are very mild, some are snowy and icy and cold, and anywhere in between. And so every year in every season, things are going to fluctuate. And that's going to affect everything within that environment. It's going to affect the plants that live there, the animals that live there, and the way that they interact. And so because the environment is constantly changing and the pressures that organisms are facing is constantly changing, natural selection can never lead to perfect organisms. Might lead to very well adapted organisms over a long period of time, but they're never going to be perfect because the situation around them is constantly changing. So this image here is the same Galapagos finches that I talked about previously with the beak size and seed shape changes through the year. So this actually extends past the example I used a few minutes ago. So the example I used a few minutes ago showed 1976 and 1978 only, showed the average beak sizes between those 2 years, and then of course there was that drought in 1977. So this graph shows over several years between 1976 and 1984 how the average beak size changed. So you can see every couple of years there's a drought, and remember that affected the seed size. So when there was a drought, there were larger, harder seeds that required bigger beaks. So the following year the average beak size increased. So in, say, between 78 and 79, we had a beak size average about 9.6, and then along with the drought, it went up. Things got a little bit wetter. Now there's more soft seeds, so the beaks got smaller. Another drought, beaks had to get bigger. So remember, this is the entire population of individuals. The average beak size is increasing because if you can eat those hard seeds, if you have the adaptation to eat those hard seeds, you're going to survive better. If your beak is too small and not strong enough to eat those hard seeds, you're not going to have enough food. You're not going to leave very many offspring. And then of course we have this wet year here where the average beak size dropped. So wetter than usual, that coincided with a decrease in beak size because the wet weather allowed there to be more soft seeds. So not only is this an example of how the beaks are changing, it's also an example of how the plant populations are responding or as a result of the change in the weather pattern. So it's not just the birds that are changing, but also the other wildlife around them. So there's not really any endpoint here. Depending on the weather, these beak sizes are going to continue to fluctuate. And so the average beak size is going to be very strongly affected by the food supply and the weather. And as that weather continues to change, adaptation is going to, the adaptations in the population are going to fluctuate as well. So to sort of summarize what we just said, natural selection cannot ever lead to a perfectly adapted organism. And that's because environments change more quickly than natural selection can adapt organisms. So there's a little bit of lag time. So even in 1 year, if you have a good beak shape, there might be some lag time before the next generation of individuals have the sort of best possible beak shape for that environment. And remember, natural selection is not an instantaneous process. It often happens over several generations. Natural selection also doesn't make perfect organisms because natural selection is limited by the variation that already exists. So even if there was a possible mutation out in the world somewhere, doesn't mean that someone that's going to have a specific adaptation, it doesn't mean that any individuals are going to actually get it. And there's also the chance that nobody gets it. So natural selection can only work with whatever is already present. And if there isn't a perfect adaptation present, it'll work to increase the next best option, even if it's not the best option. And then the final thing on this slide, there's not always a single optimal adaptation. Sometimes there's combinations of traits. Sometimes there's a sort of give and take of traits. You might have a best possible adaptation thing that makes that organism most likely to survive, but it might be offset by that being very costly for the organism and they can't maybe maintain. Maybe there are other factors that limit how many individuals can have that particular trait. So there's never going to be an optimal condition for all traits at all times, and therefore a group of organisms can never be perfect for their environment. All right, so let's talk about one of the things that Charles Darwin focused on quite a bit in his in developing his theory of natural selection. And that is artificial selection. So artificial selection is when humans purposely select for specific traits. Now, this is basically like humans acting as the environmental pressure on a particular organism. So it's really human-directed natural selection. So long before Darwin put forth his theory of evolution, people were doing this. They were domesticating animals, they were domesticating plants, they were selecting for plant and animal types that best fitted their needs. Now, they didn't know that they were performing this process of evolution, and they didn't really probably even know that they were changing the genetic makeup of a population. They just knew that if they bred two organisms with the traits that they wanted, their offspring would likely have them. Then they would select for those offspring, breed those together. And so they were basically performing evolution without really knowing it. So as humans continued to do this, they were breeding specific organisms for more and more exaggerated versions of a particular trait that they wanted. Now, you can think of all kinds of examples of this. We already talked about domesticated dogs. There's also domesticated cats, any sort of farm animal, cows being selected for milk production, things like that. So we can also see it in different fruits and vegetables. So for example, broccoli, kale, kohlrabi, those are all related and selected for different traits of an original plant that was very similar to a mustard plant. So farmers would select for the leaves or the stem or a different part of their plant, and were basically working to get a vegetable that they felt was desirable. All right, so as natural selection works, it produces some very specific trends that we can notice along a spectrum of the way that traits are selected. So we can either say that traits can be specifically categorized, so our white tigers or our orange tigers, or traits can fall within a continuous range. So here we've got height, we've got a continuous range of individuals from short all the way to tall. And natural selection can work towards causing one type of trait to be more advantageous than others. So there's a couple of ways that this can work. First off, we can have directional selection. So in directional selection, individuals with one extreme of the range of variation will have higher fitness. So this example I find really interesting. So turkeys on poultry farms have been selectively bred, so artificial selection, to increase their breast muscle size, because the turkey breast is the thing that everybody wants. So they have become so large that turkeys cannot naturally, the farm-raised turkeys can no longer naturally reproduce. So all of them have to be artificially inseminated, which I think is kind of weird. But anyway, what's happening in this situation is that individuals are being selected for larger breast muscle size in farm turkeys. So individuals who are smaller are not being bred, and therefore there's a reduction in the average size of turkey breasts. So if you look at the average size of the turkey breast in a population before selection, we've got this range here in the middle. If you look at it after the artificial selection by farmers, you see an increase toward the extreme end. So the average size is getting larger. Now we can also have something called stabilizing selection. So if we have a range of phenotypes, stabilizing selection says that those intermediate phenotypes are going to be selected for. So the ones that are closest to the average. So a good example of this is birth weight in humans. So if you look at the average weight of babies born, the average weight falls between 7 and 8 pounds. Now this is because babies that are too small tend to have medical complications. They're not ready to be born yet, or they're slightly underdeveloped. There's a lot of reasons they can have complications. But babies that tend to be too small tend not to survive as well. And so in that case, there's a selective pressure against smaller individuals. On the other end, you have problems with individuals being born who are too big. Now, this can be a problem, particularly before the common use of a cesarean section, because individuals who were too large often died in childbirth, and the mothers as well, because of complications of them being too large. And so this led to selective pressures on either ends of the extreme, and this stabilizing selection where most individuals fall around the middle range of birth weight. So our third type of selection is called disruptive selection. Disruptive selection is basically the opposite of stabilizing selection. It's where there's a selective pressure against the medium or the mid-range phenotypes, and the extremes are selected for. So in this example here, we have coho salmon, and in this particular fish, Medium-sized fish are outcompeted by larger fish. So that means individuals who are medium-sized can't compete for mates, and the larger fish pass on their genes. And so you see an increase in larger size. Now, on the other end though, that doesn't seem to make sense, because if fish are smaller, wouldn't the larger ones just outcompete them too? Well, actually, the smaller fish are able to sneak in and basically trump the larger fish and fertilize eggs before they're even detected. And so we see the smaller fish passing on their genes as well. And so we have selection for both the small and the large, but selection against the medium-sized fish.